Thank you for coming to the Dissertation Club. This is a space where we welcome recent graduates to discuss their dissertations. Every week, a graduate will present their dissertation. Ofek has kindly accepted the offer to deliver the second session. Ofek Bruck is a lawyer specializing in corporate and commercial law. His dissertation is entitled SPACs, Spectacular Investments or Speculative Bets, Analysis of the Post-Merger Common Stock Performance of the SPAC Frenzy in 2020. It is a brilliant project. Ofek's dissertation was amongst the highest graded dissertations of this year. Before we begin, I just want to say that it is important to follow departmental guidelines and the advice of your supervisor. They take precedence over what you will hear today. Please ask questions anytime in the chat box or raise your hand, then I will alert Ofek to your questions. Ofek, feel free to start the session.
First of all, thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks Ryan for inviting me here. And I'm glad to be here with you. All right, so before I start, just a little bit of introduction. So I did make a presentation that I want to share with you, but really this session is for you, and feel free to ask any questions. I'll lead the way, and that goes for you as well, Ryan. If you have any comments or any tips that you'd want to share, or any points that you've seen when you read the dissertation. So I'll go ahead and try to share the file once again. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
You can see it now. Okay, great. So I'll first start with a bit of an introduction of the session of how I thought I'd outline it. So I'd go for a short introduction of myself. I'll show you, give you an overview of the dissertation, of what I've written, and just a little summary of the results I found. So it would give you a background before we delve into the paper itself. I'll go through a little bit of the process that I've gone through back then, and with my supervisor, of course. And at the end, we'll show the dissertation itself, go through the comments and tips that I've gathered. Mainly, I've built them upon the feedback that I've received of bullet points that I thought that can be taken as lessons to be learned from the feedback that I received from my supervisor and others grading the paper. So I'll start with a short introduction of myself. As Dr. Ryan's already told you, I'm a recent graduate of Birkbeck, just graduated actually. I think it was last month, yeah, beginning of May. I received my MSc in Management. I shared with you the picture. I didn't know if you'd be able to see me or not. Apparently you can, but anyway, I've had previous studies of laws. So in Israel, LLB and LLM, in commercial, corporate, and business law, both in Israel. I'm a qualified lawyer in Israel, and I practice law today, mostly litigation, and as well as corporate and commercial law. A lot of my work does relate to my studies at Birkbeck, and I've taken a lot from it. Maybe not directly, but indirectly, of course. And I've also added my LinkedIn profile and my email. Feel free to contact me, add me as your connection, or whatever, reach out. Okay, so next up, I'll go through a bit of the dissertation. So the name, as Ryan said, you can see it's about SPACs. A SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company. It usually raises capital from investors through the initial public offering process, through different, usually it's on NASDAQ or NYSE in the United States, but also in Europe we see some SPACs nowadays. They actually have no business really, but their only purpose is to gather money and put it into a fund and find some yet unknown company that is usually a private company, that they would want to acquire and make it public and make it listed instead of the SPAC on this exchange. So as I said, usually NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to take a look at SPACs for my dissertation was that during 2020 and 2021, after coronavirus had hit, we had seen presidential surge, really a lot of hype around SPACs, a lot of SPACs going public and trying to find companies to merge with. And you can see both charts here to your right. You can see the staggering numbers. It rose more than 100%, much more actually, and that's one of the reasons that I've decided to go and to explore this topic. So at first, I did some initial research to understand why it is that SPACs are being used so much nowadays, or back then. And I found that they usually drastically underperform other markets, whether it's regular IPOs or just the market itself. And it struck me because on the one hand, you see more and more SPACs. It was like really like mushrooms after the rain, as they say. So there were so many SPACs that came to life and tried to find companies to merge with. But when you look at the literature that was present, you saw that they drastically underperformed. So that was the question that really got to me, is like, why is that? What's different this time? Okay. And then I tried to look at early indicators to understand whether it really is different this time or if everything is the same. And the initial indicators that I found was that everything is the same, that the literature is still valid. So I decided to explore this topic and develop it into this paper. So what I did in my research was I looked at 280 firms, both SPACs and non-SPACs, that are public on NYSE, so New York Stock Exchange, or NASDAQ. Out of the whole sample, we had 64 SPACs that completed their merger during 2020, and we had 216 firms that were listed as traditional IPOs. Okay, so they listed on the same time as the SPAC had acquired the firm. So that's what I looked at. And my hypothesis was based on previous literature that I found that these SPACs are those SPACs that had merged with another company. The hypothesis was that they underperformed the markets. So again, in line with the previous literature that I'd found at the time. So the findings were that on average, they do actually distinctively underperform the markets. And I had compared them to relevant benchmarks in the industry. So it was the Russell 2000, the CRSP, and also traditional IPOs. And you can see the graph here to the right. You can see the red line is the SPACs, okay? And normal IPOs, for instance, was the, what is it? Yeah, it's purple. It was the purple one. You can see how it underperformed. So that was the main conclusion. Alongside this main conclusion, I found other interesting findings that I thought personally that were interesting and worthy of reporting in the final paper. And I found that the earlier an investor participates in this SPAC was more profitable than investing on the merger itself. And I also found a few interesting relationships, and for instance, that public investors lost more than institutional investors. which really correlates to the first point that I've spoken about. And I also found that initial returns after the SPAC merger can actually be seen as indicators for future performance. And the last anecdote that I had found was that SPACs that were led by serial sponsors, so those people usually come from, let's say, finance background, um, and that have had a few SPACs that had gone public and merged, had better performance than others. At that time, it was crazy. You'd have SPACs that were run by anyone really, even celebrities that had no real interest or knowledge in finance. They would go into the space and try to flip a SPAC. So that was the environment back then. And I had found that actually the ones that have been serial, so they've had a few SPACs under their belt, were more profitable than the others. So yeah, so that's the feedback that I've received. That I've made a few points that I've taken from it, the lessons that could be learned for future dissertations, and I thought it would be great to share that with you. Um, I think that it's very important to choose a current topic that entices the reader and that is interesting to you and the reader, actually. It's always interesting when you show your findings in graphs and visual content. It's much more accessible to the reader. Try to have your dissertation ordered in subheadings and organize it, and try to analytically cluster subcategories when you can, right? So if you have a few categories that you could subcategorize into one, instead of having, let's say, 10 subcategories, maybe have 2 or 3 that are connected. It's always important, of course, to be critical. You've probably heard that a million times during your masters. And it's, by the way, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask me, because I'm running with stuff. So if you have any questions, please do. So I said, be critical, justify everything. That's very important. You need to justify your decisions and reference them and show what others did. Why did you choose a certain topic, or certain model, maybe your topic as well, but usually your methodology, you have to justify or maybe compare it to others, right? So what I did, and I got great feedback on it in my dissertation, is that I continuously compared my results and decisions, actually, to previous literature. And this, according to the comments that I've received, it makes it much more coherent, and it would make more contribution to the literature that I explored. The last thing that my supervisor kept telling me throughout the process is try to use regression analysis, and to try to show that you really are capable of making substantial research. And even if it's not the core topic that you're exploring, for instance, in my dissertation, the cross-sectional regression was much more, let's say, sidebar. It wasn't the main thing. So I received a question by, sorry, why? Which type of writing style did you use? What do you mean by that? Referencing? No, so I used management. We used Harvard. Yeah.
And we have a question from Lasha. In which part do you compare your results to the literature? Is it in the lit review part?
Not necessarily. So at first, you in the literature review, we'll go through that. But in the literature review, what I did is pretty much I showed what the literature says, and of course I was critical of it when and where possible. And most of the comparison was done really in the methodology, when I compared my methods to other papers and justified why I took this approach or that approach, but also in the findings as well. So every time I found something interesting, even if it was contradicting of past literature, I would note that. So I would say, I'll show you later, but I would say, I found this and that, which is similar to findings by, I don't remember the names, but whoever, right? So I tried to make it throughout the dissertation. And of course, once I finalize and I've written my conclusions, that's also where you can really reference to past literature and show what you've done in comparison to other papers. Yeah. Okay. So just I'll go quickly over the process that I've gone through. Um, I'm a January start, so that changes the timing, right? So I wrote the month and what I did. I think you can understand if you were October start, whatever. So at first, I had a supervisor which was brilliant, by the way, Karen Shields. I didn't really have the right topic as of yet. She gave me a lot of advice, um, and at first, I had gone through the process with you of how I came to this topic, but it was really something that interested me, and I'd seen a lot of news on that, and I thought it was very interesting. So I did some more literature review on it and found out the gaps that I've told you about. And together with her, we've really structured the topic. And then I had the proposal, of course. I went through with submitting the proposal, received some feedback from Karen, and tried to research further on the literature. And then we had another meeting, a bit more of the financial methods. I don't come from a background of finance, so it was kind of, I come from law, as you know, which is very much the opposite. So I had to read a lot to understand the research methods. And I also started around June, yeah, to start collecting the data and to start the initial analysis, but very, very minimal. Then we had another meeting of the research methods because I really, again, I didn't come from that background, but fortunately, Karen was actually, she taught me this module that I this focused on, so investment management, which was very fortunate for me, and she could really understand the topic and give me enough tools um, and the papers as well, so she could reference the right papers. Now, one of the comments I could give you is go back to your modules and see the papers that the lecturers have posted on what do you call it, on Moodle, because that could give you great advantage, and do take advantage of that. And if they haven't posted it yet, and you know a certain module relates to your dissertation, maybe you can reach out to them. I'm sure they'll be glad to help you and give you some right papers. Okay, so again, so I started with the data analysis, and I started writing my results and a bit of the discussion. And in November, I pretty much finalized everything. And then in December, I handed it in. So, but you can see that it's an ongoing process. And it really, it took a lot of time, but I loved it actually, right? Because I was really into the topic, so that really shows you how much it's important for you to really like what you're doing, because this is a commitment, right? The dissertation, and you should take it very seriously, because I think that's probably the best project that I've had in the management course. I mean, I've learned a lot from the course itself, but from the dissertation process is by far the most that I've learned from. So that's one of the comments that I have. So yeah, this is the process. So again, I'll show you now the dissertation itself, and we'll go through the chapters, and I'll try to explain each chapter. And I've also added some comments that are based on the feedback that I've received, things that I learned from the feedback, and I think you can learn from as well. Maybe you can apply to your papers or other work in the course as well. All right, so we'll just zoom in a little bit. Okay, so that's just the cover, acknowledgements, we can skip that. Okay, so abstract is, of course, you write it pretty much at the end after you've written all of your dissertation, and you can really put it down in 100, 150 words just to highlight the most important things and findings that you've reported, and where is your contribution to the literature. So we won't really stay here for long unless you have any questions about it. All right, okay. So table of content, of course, try to do it as neatly as possible. Everything really, when you write, has to be coherent and readable really to the reader. You should always think of how people read it and try to make it as organized as possible. So as you can see, I've decided to have 6 main chapters. First one was the introduction. So it's pretty much I took the abstract, but much more, a bit more into depth. Then the second one is a more in-depth introduction of this special purpose acquisition company, of what it is, or of what happened in the recent few years and why this is noteworthy and research worthy. I've also gone into some legal challenges of the SPAC because I come from a legal background and I had to somehow insert it. And I gave also an overview of the whole process of a SPAC. Yeah, okay. Then I went into the financial performance of SPAC. So this is my literature review. And I've tried to subcategorize it to 3 main issues. So that was the performance of the SPAC from the day the SPAC went public. And the second point was from the day the SPAC had merged. And the third was to try to explore what can indicate the performance of a SPAC for future research or for the cross-sectional regression analysis that I had done. The fourth chapter dealt with the research methods. So the data that I collected and what the process was, how I collected it, then how I analyzed it, and lastly, in this section is what is my research question and what am I looking for, and how would I reach a decision of whether the hypothesis was accepted or denied. For projects that involve coding or implementation, is it better to put the code in the appendix within the concerned section of the chapter? Well, this is a general question, a more specific question actually to computer science, but I'll try to answer that from my own knowledge, which is not in the computer science session. I think, well, it depends, right? It depends. If it's just one line of code, you can probably put it within your dissertation. If it's, I don't know, a few pages worth of code, I would put it as an appendix. I don't know if Ryan, you have any comments on that, maybe you can jump in. But generally, that's what I would feel. as a reader of a project in, let's say, computer science, then I'd feel much more comfortable if it was just 1 or 2 lines that would be in the dissertation, and if it was much more than that, I would put that in the appendix. And as you can see, I added an appendix, which was all of the companies that I had explored, all of the SPACs that I had explored. I thought it would be good to put as an appendix and not put it in the dissertation itself because it's too long and not really useful. But I think, again, for computer science, you probably have to see what's customary in this field, maybe look at some papers and try to understand what people usually do. Yeah, great. How did you hyperlink each chapter? Yeah, okay. You mean hyperlink as in technically, or how did I link? Like,
I know hyperlink because when you click on chapter 1, it takes you direct to chapter 1. When you click on chapter 2, like how did you do that?
So technically speaking, right? That's what you're.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, of those of you who use Adobe Acrobat, you can probably save the Word file as just save as Adobe Acrobat, and it does that automatically.
Okay.
But that's only if you use headers and subheaders.
Okay, makes sense.
During your, yeah. So I usually do that. I always do that. I write for my living, right? So litigation is really pretty much writing, and I always make sure that what I write is in headers and subheaders, so you can easily find yourself within this within the document. So once you do that and then you save it as a PDF, you usually are hyperlinked automatically. If not, then you can use software such as Adobe to add those. And I'm sure if you just look up on Google, you can find many other softwares that do that. And I don't know what LaTeX is, but Louis just made a comment on this app, which can be used. So I was talking about research methods. Then we went into the analysis and discussion of the findings, gave some summary statistics, and analyze it more in depth. We'll see that further on. And then the last chapter was the final remarks, is what I call it. It's pretty much a conclusion, right? When you conclude your findings and what you've successfully gathered or unsuccessfully. Your dissertation doesn't have to be successful. I mean, the research question doesn't have to be successful for your dissertation to be successful, right? And at the end, just references and appendix, which we've talked about. I also included a table of contents for the figures that I've added within the dissertation. You don't have to do that, but it's advisable. All right. So first thing is the introduction. Again, the introduction is where you just want to sum things up for the reader and entice the reader and tell them what they should be looking for and what your goals are in this paper. I tried to give a little background of SPACs and why it's been so important to explore this topic, just as I told you earlier on. And what else? Yeah, so I summarized what I was going to do. So take a look at 60/40 SPACs and compare them to other IPOs and other market benchmarks. Okay. And I also thought it would be very, very important to lay out your research question in your introduction so people would know what you really are looking for and what you're trying to show. And you can find this here. Okay, so this paper will primarily address the proposition that these SPACs underperform market indices. Okay, and that's what I did. And I tried to show really the layout of the paper. So chapter 1 is this, chapter 2 is that, chapter 3, and so forth. Okay, and then as I told you, I tried to go more into depth of what SPACs are. Again, why is it important that, why did you choose this topic? I think it's very important to always show the importance of your study and the contribution that it might have having the right findings. So that's pretty much what I did here. I gave a little history of SPACs. As you can see, I went all the way back to the 1990s and showed how their evolution to today's SPACs. Really, it's a different company, but they were blank check companies back then, and today is a SPAC. It's pretty much, it's not the same, but it's similar. Okay, so going back to Ryan's comment, I also linked the figures to hyperlink the figures, which I think personally is very helpful when the reader, when you reference a figure and the reader can just jump to that figure just to see what you're talking about. And I actually did that by hyperlinking in Word itself. So you right click, use link, and then you give the command to link to this document, and then you choose wherever you want to link to. So that's also something that I use, and I think it's very easy to use and very easy to read. Okay, I'll jump through a little bit. Okay, so here you can see that's where I link to. Again, very important to my understanding, and also as far as the feedback that I received, to show your wording into graphs. So try to entice the reader's attention by using graphs as much as you can see. Here we saw these graphs earlier. You can see the tremendous just rise, this steep rise of the use of SPACs, and that's, for instance, the interest of the public in SPACs. So I just looked at Google Trends and understood what was behind it, and I think that in this section of the dissertation, which is an introduction, when you're just trying to show why something is important, you can use various resources, maybe newspapers, and show just the interest of the public. That's all I'm trying to show here, right? So it doesn't have to be always reference to an academic paper. Ryan, if you have anything opposing that, please feel free to comment. But that's what I think that in this stage of the dissertation, just in the introduction. Okay, so as I told you, I went into the recent legal challenges of the SPACs. We'll just go through that. And okay, here is just the life cycle of the SPAC. So again, try to show everything graphically. So I'll just summarize it with this graph, right? So everything that I just said, 3 pages worth of words, is in this little figure that I've made. I think that's a very good practice to do, and it's much more interesting just to when you look at figures. It's much more readable. Okay. Next chapter was the financial performance of SPACs, which we discussed. Is pretty much a literature review. So again, I try to show that these SPACs underperform, and I found many resources that say that. I try to analytically subcategorize the papers that I found. So you can see the first one is performance following the SPAC IPO. And by the way, I've received good feedback on that I'd done that, the sub-categorization. Second category that I found was pretty much after the merger. So the first one is after they go public. The second step is after the merger. So I found a second category of literature that discusses this specific timing, which is perfect for me because that's what I'm looking for, right? So the post-merger share performance of SPACs, which are de-SPACs really. And then lastly, I looked at possible indicators of SPACs. So back to your question of when would I, oh, sorry, no, it's something else. Okay. So of course, as you always hear, try to be critical during your writing. This is not just something that you have to lay out there. You have to analyze everything that you write. So for instance, here I found great papers, but they were only based on small samples. So just add a little comment on that and say, you know, this might not be perfect to our case and why it should not be perfect. For instance, small sample, or in this paper that you can see, the authors themselves, they indicate that the adequate index to compare to is not the one that they use. Okay, so just point it out, and you would probably gain more points for that, for being critical. Also, I think personally you should try to conclude every subsection to make it much more coherent. Okay, let's go through. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Okay, this is the research methods. So the data collection process is pretty simple, actually. As what did you do? Try to really lay that out so the reader understands what you've done and the efforts that you've put in. And if you can, try to justify your decisions. For instance, why you chose a certain sample and not the other sample, and how you chose your benchmark, how you chose the control group, or whatever it is that you do during this process. Try to explain it, and if you can, maybe you can reference this to other papers. That would be also great. Okay, so here we're in the analysis, and here again in the analysis, I thought that it would be good to go into the literature of the financial literature, actually, of how to analyze the data, and I found it also helpful for myself, right? Because I don't come from this background, so it kind of led me of how to do it, and I laid it out as part of my dissertation. So I started with a bit of background of how I was going to measure things and put some of the formulas. I tried to look at things in a different way, so I looked at a few different approaches and tried to have a more robust finding, right? So I also looked at, for instance, raw rate of returns with event studies and abnormal returns, which is very financial, so probably we'll not get into that, right? But different approaches that you can find, and then you can maybe try to show how it's robust, because your findings are the same with different approaches, right? So again, here, for instance, try to understand why what you chose is appropriate for this analysis, and why others did not choose that. For instance, you can see here how I reference papers when I decide to go for the Russell 2000, but here down below, you can see that I'm indicating that other papers had used another benchmark. And on the next page, I criticize that, and I analyze why, in my opinion, this should not be used as a benchmark and why I did not use that. Okay, so I think this can, again, be critical. It can give you added bonus of points. Again, here I indicate that the authors say why their papers can be scrutinized. Just report that. Be critical again, right? And if you have any issues that you have with your analysis, try to raise those and say why it might not be perfect and how else you could do that. Okay. I'll give you an example. Where's that? What you're looking for? Okay, no, it's not that. No, just a second. Right. This is the example I was looking for. So I had a problem with my analysis because I found that there are some biases that had been reported in similar studies. And then I asked myself the question of how can I go through it and does it apply in my case? So I've come to the conclusion that it does not apply in my case, but nevertheless I decided to report it, and I've also decided to try to control it and account for it in my analysis. So even if you have issues, don't try to just ignore them, but try to attack them and see how you can do better and how your paper would prevail those biases. So that's, for instance, what I did here. Okay, so last thing in this section was the research question. That it's very important, for my in my opinion, to really show what you're looking for and how you're gonna make a decision on whether the question is answered or not, and whether your hypothesis is declined or accepted. Try to show that in this section. And any questions so far? Because I feel I've been rambling on. Okay. Okay, last, so chapter 5 was my analysis, which is really the fun of the dissertation. So you really understand already what you've found and you try to show and prove your points. I start with some basic summary statistics of the samples. I try to show everything in figures because I think it's much more accessible. It's also much more professional, and try to find out how in your industry or your field people report their findings and try to imitate that really. That's probably the best thing that you can do, and try to be consistent with those. Yes, Ryan. Do you have any comment?
No. Carry on.
Okay, so yeah. All right, so I'll just carry on. So as you can see, a lot of figures and graphs just to show your findings. Is there a question?
Yeah. Hi. Quick question. Move my hand down.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you use for like the pie chart and things like that you've got there? Did you do that in what, Excel or PowerPoint or Microsoft BI or?
Well, what are you again? Could you repeat that?
Sorry. Yeah. Like, what the question or?
Yeah, your question.
Yeah. So you got like a pie chart here.
Oh yeah.
What did you do? Did you do that in Excel or was that PowerPoint or Microsoft BI?
Yes,
or?
that was by using Excel,
Okay.
the PowerPoint itself. The tables are just by Word, and the analysis itself was based on SPSS mainly, but also some calculations in Excel. But the graphs were pretty much all by Excel.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So really, this process is gonna accompany you throughout your degree, and I think that it's a great process to really learn. The best thing that you can do is read a lot of papers in this field and try to understand what you're expected to do, right? So pretty much what you're expected to do is write a publishable paper, right? That's like the highest grade that you can get. If you get a publishable paper, you'll probably pass with distinction, right? So take examples of the university gives you a lot of tools of past examples of dissertations. You can also see other papers of scholars and try to build on that, both on the material level, so really the content of them, and also on the technical level. So how do I build my charts? What's the methodology that I use? How do I reference, right? So sometimes in different disciplines, you have different referencing styles. So maybe you don't come from this background. So you can use that. So that's pretty much the best advice that I have. Try to be as transparent with your supervisor as possible, because you'll get great advice, and try to stay connected to them. That's pretty much it. If you have any comments or questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Ofek. Any final questions before we wrap up? Okay, we're on that. Thank you, Ofek. I really appreciate it. I've got to give you the round of applause.
Thank you, Ryan.
Really appreciate that. Great session, guys. So after I do a bit of editing, I'll release the video tomorrow with the link as well. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for coming to the session. Thank you, Ofek, again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take
Thanks
care,
for
everyone.
having me.
Bye.